Today, I'm going to be talking about Spectrum. No, not the internet service provider, but rather a scale in which to classify something. You can have a spectrum of political opinion or a spectrum of activity. But today I'm going to be talking about one that has gained more recognition since its first official diagnosis in 1943. Autism. Now, because autism is a spectrum, everyone who's on it is different, from high functioning to nonverbal. Today, however, we're going to look at the world through the eyes of a child with high functioning autism. Me. First, we're going to look at the history behind autism, then delve into the wires of my mind before finally putting the puzzle pieces together to see what a typical day in my life is like with autism. Now, autism has been more of a recent discovery, first being used by Eugene Bleuler in 1911 to describe the highest level of schizophrenia. He defined it as infantile wishes to escape reality and replace them with fantasies and hallucinations. And until around the 1950s, this was the most heavily believed idea on what autism was, until Michael Rutter, who was a child psychologist, performed the first genetic study on autism. And he found that, unlike what Bleuler believed, people with autism had a lack of fantasy rather than an excess. And this fully changed the way that the scientific community defined autism going forward. Specifically talking about high-functioning autism, it wasn't added to the spectrum until 1994. It was originally discovered by a Nazi, Hans Asperger. Historians originally believed that Hans protected children who had autism from the Nazis, when in actuality he was a supporter, and those not deemed to be of high enough standards were eradicated. Now, among this constant shuffling in of children, there were a couple that were a little different from the rest, and as he deemed them to have higher intelligence. These, of course, he named after himself as having Asperger syndrome. Once it was added to the spectrum, they renamed it high-functioning autism. Autism, as well as a multitude of other divergencies, are now seen as neurodivergencies, because rather than scientists seeing them as disorders or symptoms, they now see them as just a different way in which the mind works. Speaking of how the mind works, let's talk about the autistic mind. Neurodivergent minds are fairly similar to neurotypical minds with a few key differences. One that's noticed among many with high-functioning autism is a higher IQ. For me, I love math. I could do it any day of the week and it comes pretty easily to me. In a study done by Stanford, they took a group of 36 children with similar IQs, half with high-functioning autism and half without. And they found that every single time, those with high-functioning autism outperformed those without. While they were performing this study, they were looking at the neurological pathways of those with high-functioning autism and found that in the area of the brain where spatial recognition and facial reasoning takes place, it was acting differently than how a neurotypical mind would work. And they found that in sacrificing those abilities, they were able to gain different ones. Another big thing that's noticed among those with high-functioning autism is hyperfixations. Hyperfixations are when somebody fully envelops themselves into one thing. For me, that's Disney, Legos, and old stuff. I could tell you anything you wanted to know about any of them, and I have plenty of memorabilia to prove it. From the Lego Titanic to a Walkman to every single Disney animated movie on DVD. Now, according to a website, ASB, a website that helps parents guide their way through parenting an autistic child, they found two main reasons for why high-functioning autistic people have these hyperfixations. The first one is that it's just wired into their brain and something that they can't really turn off. The second one is that it helps them cope with life stresses and anxieties that may come along. For me, I found that I can always calm down by building a Lego and listening to some good 80s tunes. And so, now that we've learned a little bit about autism, let's see what a typical day in my life with it is like. One of the biggest things that affects my day-to-day life is routines and schedules. I always need to know where I'm going, what I'm doing, and every time I do something, I have to do it at the same time, every time. This can be from how I wake up in the morning, to a club I might have once per week, to an event in the nearby future. And if something changes or impedes upon this routine and schedule, it could cause me anxiety or stress. Another big thing that affects my day-to-day life is textures and materials. There are some textures that I like and I find comfort in, like fleece, where when I have it or I'm wearing it, I feel comfortable and it can help me calm down. But there are some materials that can cause me a bit of anxiety, such as denim, where when I'm wearing jeans, it sometimes causes me to not act fully like myself or can cause me to get stressed or anxious. This can even pile into foods, where certain food textures I don't like, and so I don't eat those foods. And there are some foods where if there's impurities or changes to how it normally is, such as a pair with brown spots, I may cut them off or not eat the food entirely. Another big thing that affects my day-to-day life, and some people say is the biggest thing that affects my day-to-day life, is my inability to understand sarcasm. No, really, this is true. And I'm not talking about like such phrases as, it's raining cats and dogs outside. I don't think it's actually raining cats and dogs outside. But it's more of that day-to-day use that very much relies on social cues like, hey, that's a pretty nice shirt. Now, this also affects how I use sarcasm, where sometimes I don't always use it in the best situations, or when I do use it, I don't use those social cues that tell people, hey, this is sarcasm. Basically, think of Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. But being fully serious, the biggest thing that does affect my day-to-day life is my inability to get embarrassed. This can come from both social embarrassment and stage fright. On the stage fright end, I've always found that I've never gotten those butterflies in my stomach like many do. I've always found comfort in presenting to an audience or performing on a stage. And as for social embarrassment, I found that I am able to be who I want to be and express myself fully, and I don't let others' opinions shape who I am. I only am the one who shapes who I am. And this even comes to my knowledge of having autism, where I don't feel like I need to be afraid or feel like I need to hide that I have autism, but I love to share it with others because not everybody always realizes that somebody like me would have autism. And so, informing about autism is very close to me, not just because I have it or because I want to teach society or refute stereotypes, but also because people with autism don't always get a voice. Most times when you hear about autism, it always comes from a doctor or a scientist or a family member, and never really the person who has autism themselves. Sure, we have our neural pathways fire differently, hence why we're neurodivergent, and yes, we don't always understand every social cue, but we're not some robot that spits out simple responses and phrases. We are a human who experiences emotions and feelings. I always felt like having personal experiences is a great way of educating others. And that's why I not only informed about the history and the science of autism, but also my personal experiences with autism, because I hope that you have gained some new knowledge or a better understanding of what autism is like and seeing it through the eyes of somebody who lives it every day.